Brand nerds. We are back at you for another podcast of Brands, Beats, and Bytes. But Larry, before we begin, I gotta shout out some of the members of the 100 countries in the Brand Nerds community. So
Ooh,
I've,
do
I've
tell.
decided to tell them a shout out about 10 of these for the next 10 episodes. So if
Okay,
you
I don't even
bear
know
with
these
me,
brand nerds. Yeah,
okay, here
tell
we
me.
go. You ready, LT? Let me
Yeah,
let me
yeah,
hit
yeah.
you. Okay. Shout out the UK, France, Germany, Nigeria, Ghana, India, Italy, China. That's just a few. So I want to shout out you brand nerds in those countries and tell you all we got a special one today. A
Yes.
special one. So brand nerds, you all know I like things in threes. So I'm gonna break this down in three to start with. First, a quote. Marketing is too important to be left to the marketers.
Yes.
That's from Sergio Zeman. And today's guest is not a marketer by training. Okay, this is an engineer by training, but definitely understands marketing. Number two, the best marketing is innovative marketing. And our guest today, LT, has one of the most innovative minds, I
Yes.
dare say, in the world. And finally, entrepreneurship. This dude is an entrepreneur multiple times over. Multiple times over. And you all know in Silicon Valley, they say fail fast. And they often refer to quotes by Thomas Edison. If you fail 10,000 times, you know 10,000 ways that it doesn't work. Therefore, you arrive at the ways that it works. And then finally, LT, before I turn it over to you to introduce our auspicious guest today, I'm going to give you a bar from one of my favorite hip hop groups, EMPD. And the bar is relax your mind, let your conscience be free, and get down to the sounds of EMPD. All right, so here we go, guys. I don't know what you brand nerds need to do to relax your minds. Okay, some of you might just need to sit down and do a chant. Some of you might decide to add other substances. I am not in any way condoning that. And I'm not suggesting that our guest today, Larry, is condoning that. But I am saying sit your asses down and take a minute to listen to this podcast because this guy is exceptional. LT, who do we have in the building today?
All right, DC. That's a great setup. We have Dr. Jeff Karp in the house today. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. So, okay, brand nerds. I had the great fortune of sitting next to Jeff on a flight from SFO to Boston. And Jeff, we're very transparent with our audience, with our brand nerds. And Jeff and I started talking, and while Jeff's background, as DC alluded to, is completely different than any other guest we've had on the 150 plus episodes of the podcast, we are very confident you will quickly hear why we felt Jeff is going to be a great podcast guest for us. So let's get into his background. Jeff grew up in rural Canada in Peterborough, Ontario. For college, he attends renowned McGill University in Montreal, where he earns a degree in chemical engineering, and then he attends the University of Toronto and obtains his PhD in chemical and biomedical engineering. If that isn't enough great schooling, Jeff decides to attend MIT in Boston, where he earns a postdoc in stem cells and advanced biomaterials. So at this point in 2007, Jeff joins prestigious Brigham and Women's Hospital, also known as BWH, which is in Boston, starting as instructor of medicine and working up the chain, including co-director of regenerative therapeutics and eventually to professor of anesthesia. So since BWH is a major teaching hospital for Harvard Medical School, Jeff has been also a faculty member at Harvard Medical School since 2009. Currently, Jeff serves as professor of anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School and holds an endowed chair at BWH. Over the years, Jeff has published over 175 peer-reviewed papers with more than 35,000 citations. So, okay, D, brand nerds, you may be thinking, all right, Jeff's clearly a really bright dude, but what does that have to do with marketing? Well, let us tell you. Jeff is also an internationally recognized innovator, serving as a fellow for the National Academy of Inventors. And ready for this, brand nerds? He has co-founded 14 companies. Yes, 14, including...
How many?
Yeah,
How many, Larry? I'm sorry, I'm going to hear that again.
14. And
Okay.
that also, D, includes 3 acquisitions and 1 IPO on NASDAQ. And he also has collectively raised $650 million in funding and holds more than 100 patents. His inventions that have become companies, I'm not going to list all 14, but I'm going to 3 highlights. DC and Jeff, you need to know this, as DC alluded to. We love 3s, so we're going to highlight 3. So the first one is Tisium, a tissue glue for sealing holes in a beating heart. How about that, right? Number 2, Akita Biosciences, a nasal spray that neutralizes airborne pathogens. And number 3, Bullseye Therapeutics, a needle that automatically stops between tissue layers in the eye to deliver gene therapy to the back of the eye. And this one was acquired in 2021 by Mira Therapeutics. So Jeff is also head of innovation at Geoversity, which is Nature's University, and he's the incoming executive president, which is a rainforest bioleadership training conservancy located in Panama, one of the top biodiversity hotspots in the world. If it isn't enough to be an accomplished professor at one of the most prestigious medical schools, be a successful entrepreneur, and lend his expertise to helping the environment, let's add a successful author. In 2024, last year, Jeff wrote the best-selling book, LIT, Life Ignition Tools, which has been translated into 6 languages and spotlighted on the Next Big Idea Book Club, which is curated by Daniel Pink, Susan Cain, Malcolm Gladwell, and Adam Grant, where it was also featured as one of the top 5 books to unleash your potential and one of the top 24 happiness books of 2024. And it was featured in Inc. magazine as one of the 5 must-read books to fuel your growth in the age of that AI. As you can imagine, with all this wonderful work, Jeff continually garners lots of media attention on major news outlets like CNN, the BBC, and Fortune magazine. And he's also contributed to the TED Med and TEDx communities. His articles on neurodiversity and self-evolution have been featured in publications like the Toronto Star, Fortune magazine, and Fast Company. And he currently writes a Psychology Today blog, helping people thrive personally and professionally. As we get to the end of this intro, brand nerds, perhaps the best part is Jeff is really a great human. Dr. Jeff Karp is on a mission to help people move from disconnection to connection, beginning with the journey of learning to code his own brain at age 7. Struggling with undiagnosed ADHD, Jeff discovered that embracing neurodiversity could unleash extraordinary powers of observation, hyperfocus, and creativity. Through this realization, Jeff transformed personal challenges into catalysts for innovation, leadership, and growth. Today, he shares these insights worldwide, inspiring audiences to cultivate meaningful connections with themselves, others, and the world around them. Beyond his scientific and business achievements, Jeff's story is defined by a deep commitment to spirituality, mindfulness, and nature's inherent wisdom. Jeff lives in Brookline, Massachusetts with his wife, Jessica, son, Josh, daughter, Jordy, and 2 Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, Ryder and Ginger. Feel really lucky to have him here. Welcome to Brands, Beats, and Bytes, Dr. Jeff Karp.
Hey, thank you so much. And I must start by just saying that truly I'm just as surprised as you are about all the things that you just listed, because and I really say that from a place of it's from this place of as you kind of mentioned, I really struggled a lot when I was younger, and maybe we can get into some of that, but just some of the challenges in elementary school. And I really feel like a lot of this is just finding ways to channel the energy. Everybody represents this incredible source of energy and inspiration, and ability to create and to create experiences, to create products, to create art, to create all kinds of things. And I feel like it's bringing people together with a shared purpose, a vision. Magic truly happens, and I've just been really surprised and lucky and fortunate that I've been able to be in the presence of so many people who have just brought their creativity to the table in a major way.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry. You about to say something, brother?
I was just going to say, DC and you have a lot of things in common here, which I love to get into. Take
We're
it.
going to get into that a little later, a
Yeah.
little later, in what's popping specifically.
Yeah.
We're gonna lay all of this out.
Yeah.
Uh, how would you like us to refer to you?
Jeff.
Jeff,
My kids
Dr.
call me
Jeff. Okay,
Jeff. Everyone calls
okay.
me Jeff. Yeah.
Okay,
He's
Jeff. All
definitely
right.
a Jeff. I can tell
Okay.
you that
We'll
easily.
then Jeff. Then Jeff, we're gonna go there. So Jeff, when Larry does these introductions, and he does an exceptional job, I study the reaction of the guest. And oftentimes what I see through the eyes and you talked about energy, the energy that I feel is as if Larry is writing a script, talking about a script of a movie. And this is the lead character of this movie. And you, Jeff, as the guest, are like sitting in the audience watching the movie. Okay. What? Like, oh wow, that's what happened. So it just it says a lot when you can be in a position to hear someone else talk about your accomplishment. So again, LT, well done. And Jeff, nice watching your face as he was doing it.
Jeff wrote half of it, by the way. He just doesn't know that. I stole literally from his bio.
All good, brother. All good. Second thing is, the brand nerds, I want you to notice something. Larry said that he and Jeff met on a plane. Jeff, as has been noted in the wonderful introduction, has co-founded 14 companies, has a company on NASDAQ, etc. You can probably make in your own conclusions that they probably did not meet in the coach section, but I digress. Which leads me to my third thing. When you talked about all of the things that Jeff has accomplished and that his patents, and you only picked 3 of them, I thought, are we not forgetting one of the patents? In 3500 BC, there was this thing called the wheel that was created in Mesopotamia. Did he not also do that, Larry? Did he? Yeah. All right, but seriously though, brand nerds. Okay, Jeff, we're getting to the get comfy section. And this is what we do to kind of warm up our guests before we start to get into the meat of the podcast. You have decided to dedicate a large portion of your life to teaching other people. And we, Larry and I, and others like us who have gone to graduate school, we have often sometimes lamented that our teachers don't know diddly squat about the real world and business. They're very good at theory, most of our teachers, but very few of them good at actually taking the theory and put it into practice. You have done both. You teach and you create and make business. How have you been able to do that? And what do you see as the advantages of being a teacher with students to actually creating and developing and running businesses?
Yeah, those are many great questions in there. And one of the things that really jumps to mind for me is how I think, for tens of thousands of years, we were hunters and gatherers, we were nomads, and we were learning through authentic experiences. And that's how we learned, right? Through interacting with nature, through sharing our experiences with others, and really being motivated a lot by, I think, survival, but also by some of these other forces of love and curiosity and creative expression. And I think that for me, in a similar vein, at a very early age, I learned, and somewhat the hard way, but maybe the good way, to lead with curiosity very early on. And I got in touch with this boundless curiosity that I had, and the experience of embracing that and really flooding my brains with all those neurotransmitters that one feels when they are leading with curiosity. And then I think, on top of that, a big part of it has been for me that to reject, kind of similar to what you said, this formal education, which just never seemed right to me, and to push for experiences, to push for learning things. Like I always felt that because I've encountered so many challenges and failures and things along the way, that that I kind of realized that, and I had support of my mom and a few select teachers that helped allow me to kind of keep going. But it was through that I learned that if things weren't working for me, if things weren't going well, that it wasn't absolute, that it meant that I just I wasn't engaging a process that worked for me, and that it was my duty to observe others and to focus my attention. Our attention is so powerful, but to focus my attention on processes that worked for other people, and then to try them on in a very authentic, experiential way to figure things out, rather than to just accept that I was going to learn how to do things in the classroom, which very quickly in my life I figured out was not the way that that I was going to be inspired, or that I was going to learn the processes I needed to engage to contribute value to society. So that to me are some of the fundamentals behind what has driven me, as well as the process that I've engaged. So I'll give you an example. When I was coming out of MIT from doing my postdoc, I did my postdoc with really, one of the top innovators that the world has probably ever seen, Robert Langer. He's co-founder of Moderna and dozens and dozens and dozens of other companies. It's estimated that his technologies have impacted billions of people on the planet in positive ways. And I there's a whole story of how I got into his lab. He initially said no to me, and I figured out actually how to get in. But the story I want to sort of focus on here is that when I was transitioning out of his lab into my faculty position, I realized that I wanted to commit my life to translation, to not just discovering new things in science, but finding ways to translate them into products that could help people. But I had this holy crap moment, because I realized that I had observed other people doing it, but I didn't know how to do it myself. That all of a sudden it just struck me that I was so excited, but I didn't know what to do. And so one of the things that I did, and again, kind of going back to this like authentic, experiential, sort of commitment, is I thought, okay, what are the skills that I need to learn in order to spin companies out of my lab to move technologies to patients? And there's things like, intellectual property, manufacturing, clinical trial design, reimbursements, there's all these things. And I thought, okay, I'd love to learn them, but it's going to take me too long to learn these things. So I started asking the question, who has these skills? And I looked around, and in the community, I realized that there were a lot of people like that the community was rich with people with those skills. And so what I did is I made a strategic decision coming out of my postdoc into my faculty position that every 2 or 3 weeks, I was going to meet with someone in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and form a relationship. And I didn't know how to do it. And I just felt the energy, the gravity to do it. And I didn't, it's not like I knew what questions to ask, but I was committed to figuring out how to forge those relationships. And over time, I did that for 10 years. I met every 2 or 3 weeks.
10 years.
For 10 years, I did that. I met patent lawyers, corporate lawyers, reimbursement, regulatory experts, people in pharma, biotech, med tech, consumer health, all across the board. I attended all kinds of networking events. And the focus was developing, not networking, it was forming relationships. And what happened was that actually led to the formation of an informal advisory board for my laboratory. It wasn't planned, it just sort of materialized over time. And so what happened is, as we're advancing projects in my lab, I could reach out to people and say, hey, if this worked, could it be manufactured using traditional manufacturing technologies? What would the clinical trial look like? And what would we need to compare to? Because we want to include that comparator early in our experiments to know if we're doing better than the gold standard or not. We want to compare to something to define importance, to define a North Star for our projects. And so that informal advisory board helped me to almost every major project in my lab has spun out into a company because of that process that I engaged. And then in addition to those relationships, I also had relationships with many people, entrepreneurs who could become CEOs of those companies, or know people who could become CEOs. So I realized that I saw other people would develop a technology, move it far along, and then they look for a CEO. But the challenge is that is relationship dependent. It takes months and months to develop a relationship with somebody. And because I committed to 10 years of developing relationships with people in the community, that actually created this flow, this connection to entrepreneurs that I already knew had relationships with, and they just naturally became the CEOs of these companies that I started spinning out of the lab.
Ooh, that's so deep, D.
Larry, you got anything in response to that? I have one, and then we'll move to our questions. Okay.
Take your one and move it. It's a mic drop for me.
It is. Brand nerds, we are in the age of technology. You have just heard from a person who got his academic footing in engineering, a highly analytical space. He has talked about labs. He's talked about patents. But the through line of it all, brand nerds, was one word: relationships.
Yep.
Relationships. All right, we'll move to our 5 questions. That was a dope answer, Jeff. That was a dope answer. All right, 5 questions. So here's what we do, Doc. Larry and I go back and forth with questions until we arrive at 5. I get to begin this.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to know is, for you, what was the first brand experience that you had that lit your soul afire? We know you're a spiritual dude. Brand nerds, his computer rather, is sitting on 3 books right now. One of them is a Zen book. So we know you're spiritual. So what was your first brand experience that was spiritual for you? You loved it. You couldn't get enough of spending time with it, or seeing it, or touching it. Almost like a first love. What was that for you?
Well, really the first time that I ever encountered brand, and when I think of brand, I think of a brand as a perception, and it's a perception of reality. And really the most profound experience in branding at the early stage I can remember is actually the labels that I got from my teachers for being lazy, a lost cause,
Okay.
for not being good enough, not going to amount to anything. At one point, they asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a doctor." And they said, "Sorry, you better set your sights lower, because that's not your brand. That's not you. You don't have what it takes." And so very early on, I got in touch with these labels that I initially believed was my identity, was my brand, right? And I had very supportive parents who really drilled into me that those labels were actually not my brand, and that there was a lot more there than I was being told by others. And it was almost like when I go back to that time, I can, almost felt like I was with a computer analogy, like I had this hardware that was good hardware, but I didn't have software that worked for me. Right. And I realized at this early age that I needed to become the coder of my own brain to program that software so that I could function in society, because I felt like an alien, that to me is really the most sort of early experience with branding, because that's, it was sort of the brand of myself, my own self identity was around. And that experience, I know I'm talking about sort of like, the inner sort of experience that actually had a profound impact on how I experienced everything around me, and how I interpreted and engaged and experienced brands from all the various products that, you know, I had at an early age, I gained this profound awareness. And one of the brands, I think, that sort of, if we're thinking about, you know, product brands that early on captivated me, was I was really into rap music. It was I had albums from Run DMC, I had the Fat Boys, I had Public Enemy. Although my parents didn't really like me playing that one, I somehow convinced them to get me that one. I was into all that. And
Christmas in Hollis was okay, but when you get to Public Enemy,
Public Enemy, I had it, and I had the explicit version as well, the tape. And back in the 80s, some of the more notable rappers were wearing hats that had the Raiders.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And so NWA among them.
Yeah. So I got myself a Raiders hat. I kind of identified with, you know, a lot of it I felt was sort of this counterculture kind of brand, and that felt right to me back then. And so that was, you know, that's how I'd answer that question.
I love your context for that, Jeff, because you would never strike me as somebody who was a Raider, the way Al Davis used to say it, you know. But because of the context that you shared, that's really deep, D. I love that.
And by the way, one thing just to add to that, which is just, you know, reflecting back at that time, it was that this awareness that I had, this self-awareness, I also, I was constantly running experiments. I was constantly trying to figure out how to fit in, really, when I was younger, because I really felt like an outcast. And so I was very focused on what I wore, what I did, what I said, and paying attention to the cues, the reactions around me. So I felt like that actually started to, I had this sort of quick evolution of getting in touch with brand awareness and the influence of the clothing that I wore. I at one point I switched my clothing to kind of more like, you know, flyboy kind of, you know, I was at this party and I saw people dressed a certain way, and I went out. It was a Friday night that weekend. I went and bought some clothes to kind of match their style. And I showed up at school on Monday wearing the clothes. And, you know, a little bit of a traumatic experience, actually, when I did that, but traumatic experiment. But I really got in touch with how, when I changed my look, how that actually changed how people interacted with me, and that really imprinted in me.
Wow, deep, love it.
All right, next question, LT.
Okay, Jeff, who is Hatters having the most influence on your career?
I think there's a few that I would like to mention, if possible. The first is actually nature. And when I was in the 3rd grade, I moved out to the country, and I'm talking the real country. There was a buffalo farm across the road, a sheep farm beside us, farmer's field in my backyard. Our driveway was 1,000 feet long, carved through a forest. There was a creek that ran, you know, there was a little bridge on it as well. And I would get off the bus, and I would actually have I'd be exhausted, kind of demoralized, actually, a lot of the time, not feeling great, because I'd been working so hard to just fit in, and you know, really that part took a lot of time, a lot of effort. But as I walked along this driveway, which we call the laneway, I felt this solace when, you know, there were no phones, there was, you know, nothing to do except look into the forest as I was walking. And I just felt like nature was hugging me. And I developed this relationship with nature at a very early age, where I just felt it was so important for me to connect with. And I felt that embrace. And, you know, the science today is sort of catching up. You know, shows us that when you actually spend time in nature and in meaningful ways, you know, it lowers your heart rate, your blood pressure, your sense of wellness increases, you know, reduced anxiety and all these things. And that experience, I think, is one of the key things that has fueled innovation in my lab, because one of the ways that we deal with failure and running into challenges is we use nature as a way to intercept how we approach problems and our thinking, because I think over time we tend to interact with the same people, we tend to have the same conversations, and our thinking gets more narrow, and there's this contraction of our thinking over time. And what we do in my lab is we turn to nature for inspiration. So we look at, like, we were developing a surgical glue, and it, we work and work and work, and then it fails, and we say, okay, well, what creatures exist in wet environments that are dynamic, like where waves are crashing against them or rain's pouring down, and we learn how they stick to surfaces. And through that, through looking at geckos and slugs and snails, we were able to create a surgical glue that could seal holes inside a beating heart. It's include 2 clinical trials now, one for sutureless nerve reconstruction and one for tackless hernia repair. So we can use this glue, works in very wet environments. So nature has really had, I would say, the most profound influence over me, and still does to this day. And I continue to deepen my connection with a variety of practices and rituals that I engage in. The other that I really like to bring up is my parents, and in particular my mother, who is a true crusader for me in a very.
What's her mom's name?
Her name is Susie.
Is she still with us?
Yeah, she's still with us. Yeah.
Shout out to Susie.
Yeah. So she saw the struggles I was going through and didn't just sit back. She really tried everything she could. And when everything was sort of failing for me, I was a C and D student up until the 7th grade. There were these speech competitions at my school, and she actually wrote the speeches for me. And she helped me memorize them, which was really hard for me. But she was kind of like, just start with one word. And if you can do one word, you can do 2. And if you can do 2, you can do a sentence. And if you can do a sentence, you can do a paragraph. Paragraph turns into a page. And next thing you know, I had the whole speech memorized. And I started to become the kid to beat. I started taking home trophies for speech competitions. And I feel like every child, every person needs just that one thing, and it doesn't matter what it is, but that one thing where they can gain confidence through self-efficacy, where they're putting effort in and the skill is just building, even in a slow way. And that's what she did. And I started thinking, where else can I apply this? And my mom, the school system didn't want to identify me as having learning differences, but my mom went up against the school board alone and fought for them to take a look at my case. She put the entire file of everything that anyone had ever said about me, all reports, everything she put together. And they identified me as having learning differences and ADHD. And I got some special accommodations, a little extra time and space. And my grades went from C and Ds to straight A's, and basically stayed as straight A's through. And that was a huge turning point for me. So my mom has been a huge influence. And then the third I'll just mention briefly is my mentors, essentially, that in my career, who have really helped me to find the processes that can work to move, to translate. And then of course, my family as well. My wife, God bless her. I mean, I have ADHD and I'm all over the place, and it's really difficult I think, to be with someone who has ADHD, but she's been a real supporter of me and created the space for me to be able to, that's conducive for me to do what I do. Yeah.
Jeff, that's so deep. I love the throughput of all that. I think that's a mic drop to the next question. DC, you want to hit the next question?
Larry, I'm almost embarrassed to ask Jeff this question, but I think he's going to have a fantastic answer.
I do too.
And he's already
Pressure's on.
He's already started to touch on this. The pressure is on. When you've got more than 100 patents, you got a lot of wins. But this question has nothing to do with any of those wins. Absolutely none of them. This one is designed to have you, Jeff, peer into your experience and identify the single biggest F up you have had, the single biggest one. And once you've identified that and share that with the brand nerds, please share also what you learned from it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the challenge is how to pick one, because there's so many, and not just so many, but so many that have imprinted in so many positive ways. It certainly didn't feel like that at the time, but kind of in retrospect, I think in retrospect, it's almost like every failure, every setback is the source of some form of innovation. And for me, if I can just kind of briefly mention a few, because I think collectively you kind of get the sense of how these kind of shaped me and sort of the process. One is I was invited to do a TED Med talk at the Kennedy Center in DC back a number of years ago. And initially I said no because I was afraid. But then I went back and said, no, I really have to do this. And I sort of stepped through that fear, and I prepared so well for it. And I knew it like, could backwards, forward. I knew it inside and out. I got to the stage and I started delivering it. And I was so nervous. I'd eaten like half a pack of Halls before I'd gone up there. And they made me even more nervous by saying that the slide changer doesn't go backwards. So if you make a mistake and go forward 2 slides, you have to yell to the AV person, can you go back a slide? Which I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that. And they also made us feel a little bit, I don't know how to say it, but they basically said, if you stop in the middle of your talk, don't cry and don't run off the stage. They said that doesn't work well. Just stand
okay.
there and smile. And so halfway through my talk, I realized I forgot a line, and I was still going, but in my mind, I was thinking I forgot a line, and I couldn't unhook from that. And I stopped. And the president of my institution was in the audience. This was 5 high definition cameras live streamed around the world, Kennedy Center in DC. And I actually stopped for 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
20 seconds. And I said,
dead silence.
Dead silence. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't say anything. And they had said, if that happens, just smile. And so I was standing there and I was trying to smile as all these swear words are going through my head, and I wasn't sure what to do. And I'm just like, and you can actually, I posted the video actually of that. It's on, you can check it out online, of the pause. And at the last second, I got this idea to advance the slide, and I advanced the slide. It was a blank slide. And I was like, what? I didn't realize I had put it in there as a cue, and I advanced it again. And then I saw an image, but then that connected me to the words that went with that next image, which then allowed me to realize that the blank slide was a cue. I was supposed to say something that at that slide, I knew what I was supposed to say. So I just started saying it again. And I continued, and I was actually able to finish the talk. And as I was walking off the stage manager came up to me and whispered in my ear. She said, "We can edit that part out for the YouTube version." And that's what they did. And you can't tell when you see the YouTube version that I stopped for 20 seconds. But I actually screenshotted it when they sort of shared the whole thing with us, and I had posted it, just that 20-second pause, online. And it was an extraordinarily traumatic experience for me, but at the same time, there was this silver lining that I was able to focus my attention on, which was the fact that I was able to recover.
Yeah.
And previously in my life, I'd been shamed during my PhD. At some point, I was giving a talk and I was shamed for some answer that I had given, and it actually had imprinted and created some trauma for me. So every talk I'd given after then, I'd had hesitation and anxiety, and wasn't really able to bring my full self into it. But this experience allowed me to release that and actually have this confidence that if I ever stopped in the middle of delivering a talk, that I would be able to continue, that I would be able to, with time, find my words. And that gave me this confidence. And so this spectacular failure or setback is what actually allowed me to release from this trauma that I had experienced, and allowed me to gain more confidence in my ability to communicate science and to other people. And then just to quickly mention, when I started my faculty position, I submitted about 100 grants in the first 2.5 years, and almost all of them were rejected. 95, 96 of them were rejected. And because people told me that, they said, you should just focus on doing what you did before, but just sort of the next thing. And I wanted to do completely new things. I wanted to do things I'd never done before. That's what I was most excited about and curious about. And I got destroyed for it. And at one point, I was coming home every week with grant rejections. And my wife said, "Are you sure this is the right career for you?"
And a legitimate question.
A legitimate question.
Yeah.
And, I sometimes question my motivation, because I think it's multi-layered, multi-dimensional. It's never one thing. And, part of it, I think, is trying to prove myself from all the people who told me that I couldn't do it, when I was younger, in addition to helping, and, there are all sorts of sort of elements of that. But what happened was, I realized that with the grants, I was actually getting feedback. And I was being, my gut reaction, my reactive ego sort of reaction, was to be very dismissive about the feedback. But what I realized is that with each failure, each setback, there was this emotional rhythm that I would notice, which is immediately I would be in this very negative space, very visceral negative space whenever I got a rejection. But after a good night's sleep or two, that would actually go in half, and then another half. And so the emotion would pendulum, this sort of negativity would start to come back. And at that moment, there was an after the rain moment every single time, where there's an opportunity to see things from fresh perspectives and new insights, and focus your attention in ways you weren't able to before. And that's where I believe where all the patents have actually come from in my lab. It's not the original ideas that we've had. It's actually the ideas led to a failure or a setback. And because we've been able to not let the emotional side define us and sort of end our crusade towards innovation, but we've allowed to sort of embrace that. And as it passes, we then look up and start to gain the insights. And often one of the ways we do that is we look for a new source of energy to bring into the projects, and a person we haven't worked with before who has a different expertise, a complementary expertise that can infuse fresh energy into a project and help us see things in different ways. And that immediately instills new fire into whatever we're doing. And we can quickly turn failure and setback and visceral negative experiences into excitement.
Wow.
Loving this.
Jeff, I'm gonna make this comment, and then I'm going to transition over to Larry. But brand nerds, there was a lot packed in that answer from Jeff. I just want to draw you to one thing, and that is, you're on a stage, you're doing a TED Talk. There are lots of people out there watching. Sometimes it might even be your boss or your boss's boss's boss watching you. And you could be doing something else, not at a TED Talk, but you freeze. You freeze. And in that moment, and for Jeff, it was 20 seconds. 20 seconds. That's a long time, brand nerds. It's a long time for a freeze. When you freeze, whether it's for 2 seconds, 20 seconds, or longer, this is the moment of truth. This is the moment of truth, because it's not the freezing, it's what happens after the freezing. And so there's a book, it's one of my favorites. It's by Ben Horowitz, also a big time hip hop dude from Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capitalist firm. He has a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And in it, Larry, you know this, he talks about hiring. And I'm going to give you a synopsis here, a Twitter version. He says, I'm not interested in hiring people, CEOs or founders, and bringing them in, investing in those folks who have a really great resume and they are really smart and they can answer all these questions. I want to know what happens when you got 2 weeks of cash left. You're not going to be able to make payroll, and you might be out of business. What do you do then? What do you do then?
Yep.
That's the freeze moment, brand nerds, that Jeff was talking about. What do you do then? And what Jeff just gave you all was a gift of what's possible after the freeze. Larry, next question, brother.
Yes. Okay, Jeff. This is awesome stuff. So
It
next
is.
question regarding technology and marketing, when you think of the two sort of together, can you tell us where you think marketers should lean in or best leverage tech, or areas they should be leery or simply avoid? And you, with your background, and your perspective, which is so different than ours, really looking forward to hearing what you have to say here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of technology, I think truly our greatest technology as humans is questions. And I think that questions in my own life it sort of comes down to the questions that I ask or the questions that I didn't ask. Which define whether I can get on the right path towards innovation and really bringing value to society, or whether that value needs to incubate more and take more time. And I think that actually in the book Lit Life Ignition Tools, there's a section that just a really short paragraph that I would love to just read about questions that I think just sort of captures how, by seeing questions as technology, we can, regardless of what career you're in, in branding, marketing, the topic of this conversation, it can really open things up and shed new light, new ways to maximize value creation. And so in the book, and I'm just gonna read this short paragraph.
Please, Jeff, we love this. This is great.
Okay, cool. I say, questions are like excavation equipment, versatile tools for action. Questions can cut like a backhoe through old assumptions, or like an archaeologist's trowel and brush that uncover buried artifacts or gems, or like the sculptor's chisel that releases a masterpiece from a slab of marble. Or think of a Swiss Army knife, the everything tool. A sharp question can pry the lid open on a conversation, cut to the core of a matter, tighten the screws of a loose concept. You can use a question to accelerate a conversation or slow it down, to allow time for reflection. I like to think of questions in the larger sense as fire starters, lowering activation energy and generating the spark for dialogue, exploration, critical and creative thinking, and curiosity. The point is to underscore this aspect of questions as tools for action, much as we think of other tools as having power and purpose. And I think, to me, there's a lot in there. And just to shed just one element of light on that is, when I got to the University of Toronto, I basically went, even if I go back to when I was 7 years old, I learned very quickly that I don't learn from the way that people teach me. I learn by asking questions. Anytime I asked a question, I could hyper focus on the answer for a few moments, and it would imprint in my mind and connect to other things that I know. And I could recall it later. Questions were just, I realized, are so powerful. Just a way to access information, to dig deeper, and to connect with people, actually. And when I got to University of Toronto, I thought I was really good at asking questions because I spent my whole life asking questions. But I was about to learn a whole new level of question asking. And I started going to these seminars, and I would sit there and dozing in and out, invited speakers, scientists speaking about all kinds of things. And I get to the end, and it was the question and answer period. And people asked the most amazing questions and I just sat there and I was blown away. But I also started to shame myself. Why am I not thinking of these questions? And what I did was, because, as I mentioned before, when I'm not good at something, or there's something I want, but I don't have it, I think, okay, there's a process that works for me, and I need to find it. And so I went into self-reflection, and I started to realize that my sort of focus on pattern recognition needed to be put into play here. So what I did was, the next seminar I went to, everyone was focused on what the speaker was saying, but I was focused on something different. I was focused on what the questions that people were asking, and I wrote them all down. And I went to the next seminar and I wrote them all down. And I went to the next seminar and I wrote them all down. And after months, I started looking at the questions that people had been asking, this library of questions. And I spent some days kind of going through, and all of a sudden had a light bulb moment. All of these questions could be grouped into 4 or 5 different categories. I was able to decode the rationale behind why people were asking these questions. The questions on their own didn't connect with me. But when I discovered the rationale, the why behind asking these questions, right, which were anything from, is the work you're doing important? Was the experiment flawed that you set up? Did you use the right statistics? Like, there are all these categories that all of the questions could go under. And it was only 5 or 4, 4 or 5 things. And once that I realized that, those questions became my questions. They came to me automatically. And I have used this in other settings as well. And I think, in the branding, marketing world, and kind of every world, what you can do is you can listen to the questions that other people ask, actually focus your attention on it and write them down and start to think about what's the rationale behind why they're asking these questions. I think we tend to have intuition around what's a good question, but we might not understand why that question's being asked. And when you start to uncover the why behind it, that somehow unlocks and can imprint into your mind. And then those questions can help you innovate in any area.
I'm loving this. This is so deep, and it goes to your consciousness of before. To be conscious, that's what I'm seeing, Jeff, about you being conscious about all that's around you, and to even analyze the questions of the Q&A makes complete sense. And you're right, it applies to everything. It's really cool. D, you want to take the next question, the last of the 5?
I do. Doc, what are you most proud of?
Wow. I would say, a couple things jump to mind. One is this book, Life Ignition Tools, that I spent 7 years writing. And, someone who is, open about neurodiversity now. And in fact, I wasn't, I really didn't talk about it with anybody, my ADHD or learning differences. And when the book came out, it's a core theme. There's other themes in there as well.
Jeff, sorry to interrupt you. One quick thing. So
Yeah.
prior to the book, you hadn't talked about it? That's what you're saying?
I hadn't. No, I never. Yeah, I didn't speak about it with anybody. And so there was this sort of, coming out, if you will, of
right.
And that it took, I had to sort of build the courage and find the way to do that, because it didn't really come naturally to me. And I actually what I did was I found a couple media trainers, and I worked with them to learn how to communicate, because may seem when I speak that I'm a natural communicator, but I'm really not. And everything you see there's been processes that I've engaged and worked at to be able to do. So I would say, going, from when the book came out and I started to go around and do these book launches, children who are neurodiverse started coming to, and parents of neurodiverse kids started coming to these book launches. And these teenagers in particular would come up to the microphone and ask me questions, and they'd be very vulnerable, and they'd share their struggles with me. And I was able to share my experiences and processes. And to me, I'm just really proud of that I was able to kind of, do the work and evolve and get to a place where I was able to be vulnerable on a stage and share and attract others who are willing to be vulnerable. So that to me, it was really, that's something that I'm really proud of. And I think, some of the other things are with some of the technologies that we developed in my laboratory that have had impact on patients, and kind of far and wide. So hearing those stories has really been rewarding. And then I think also the people that I work with and where I've been able to sort of touch their lives in certain ways that have helped them to spread their wings and be able to have more self-confidence and efficacy and be able to contribute value to society in more significant ways. So I'm very proud of that too.
Wow, Jeff.
There's nothing to add for me, D.
Me either. Me either.
All right. Well, this is Jeff. This is fabulous. We so appreciate everything that you are sharing with us. So we're going to move to the next section, which is what's poppin'. What's poppin', D?
What's poppin'?
So Jeff, this is our chance to shout out, shout down, or simply have something happening in and around marketing, business, the world today that we think is good fodder for discussion. What have you got for us, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I think of marketing and branding, and I think of, in the context, especially of the companies that I've co-founded and the products that they've generated, and the ones that are on the market or soon to be on the market, I think of the incredible importance that marketing and branding have to truly be part of bringing solutions to society in a very impactful way, to truly help, to truly add value. And I think, to me, one of the sides of it that I also do focus a lot of my attention on is actually attention itself. And this realization that our attention as humans is valuable because it's limited. And I have noticed through personal experiences how branding and marketing can capture my attention. And I think from a very core, sort of fundamental aspect of a living being, our attention is often there to help us stay healthy and to survive and to focus on our well-being. And I think that that marketing and branding has become so smart and so effective and so powerful that it can divert our attention away from focusing on our well-being and our health of not just ourselves but those around us, and can do it for very important and valuable ways, but also for things that can be very distracting and can actually take us away from caring for our own well-being and health. And I think that this is one of the contributors to why we have these epidemics of obesity, anxiety, loneliness, depression, which I think over half the people in our country have at least one of those in a severe sense. Many have all four, and so to me, I think that our attention, often in the context, we spoke earlier about these authentic experiential, that's like we're programmed for that, to interact with nature, and nature is very enriching and is a source of awe and wonder. And I think that I just throwing it out there, that to all the marketers and branders, just to think about that as you're developing strategies and helping to move products into society, that I think there is this sort of moral, ethical consideration of what are you diverting attention away from, and what could you divert, how could you divert attention back towards helping people to take care of themselves. And so that's something that has really been popping for me lately.
Nice.
That's awesome. This is great stuff, man. Really awesome. Jeff, this is when our shows go like this, They go really fast. So we're going to get into the close right now. I mean, I've got so many learnings, brand nerds, but I'm going to try and call them. I'm going to make them as quick as I can. So I have about 8 or 9. So number 1, consciousness, brand nerds. Consciousness in every moment. Dare I say the foundation to Jeff's success in life is he's always practicing being conscious in every moment. That's first one. Embrace and lead with curiosity. That's second. Third one, nature is our greatest teacher. Think about how Jeff is constantly utilizing nature, both with his surgical glue, but just in life overall. Number 4, I love this. Observe other processes that work for other people. And Jeff said, and this is a quote, try them on in your most authentic way. 5, relationships, brand nerds, not networking, relationships with people in your world. And just like Jeff did, he forged relationships, and who knows where it goes. Jeff's story about where all the places that relationships went were just incredibly the flowering that happened. But it's about relationships. Don't think network, relationships. 6, every setback is the source of some sort of innovation. 7, resilience. Think of Jeff's TED Talk. Resilience, brand nerds. It's about getting off the floor, right? That's so important. 8, rejection equals feedback. Strip out emotion, take the feedback, and translate that into helping you move forward. And then my last one is thoughtful questions are the foundation to your life, work, and ultimately success. Those are my learnings in the Twitter version.
Ooh, Larry. Ooh, Larry. That's strong, brother. That's strong. There is a cacophony of stuff to take from what Doc has provided here. So many jew-els dropped. It is hard. Like the sparkles are like blinding me. So many jew-els have been dropped by Jeff Karp, the fly boy. Okay, Jeff. This is the part of the program where I make an attempt. The attempt that I make is to feel the human before me and share my view based on what I've heard and what I've seen, and most importantly, what I've felt. What is it that this soul is bringing to the 7.2 or 3 billion people on the planet that is uniquely theirs, theirs. And if they don't do it, no one's gonna do it. We miss it as humanity. And I'm going to attempt to do that with you now, Jeff. I want to go back to something you said early. You talked about your desire from a business perspective to commit to a life of translation. All right. Now, you mentioned it in business, like taking business things from your lab and translating them to patients, but I think you meant it bigger than that. All right. Even though the example that you gave was a business example. When we talked to you about the question of brand, we've never gotten like your favorite brand, the first brand experience that you fell in love with. We never got an answer about oneself. And you talked about these labels that were given to you as brands when you were a shorty, and they weren't all that nice. They weren't that nice about you. And your mother rejected these brands. She said, no, son, these are not you. You got some different brands. Don't listen to that. And I use that as a setup now to go into what I think are Jeff Karp's unique gifts. Let's go back to your mother, Susie. You described her as a crusader. Crusaders. This is not someone who's like, come on, son. A cheerleader. I think you can do it. I really believe you can do it. Come on, son. No. This is someone who's ready to go to war for their child. She was ready to go to war. So I start with that. The second is that your mother said, hey, with this poem here that I've written for you, I've got for you, that you were just petrified about, like, Mom, I can't do this. She said, if you can remember one word, you can remember two. This is a number, Jeff. 1, 2.
Mm.
Third thing, you talked about your early days in academia, post-work, and you're writing grants. You said you wrote 100 grants, 95 were rejected. Numbers, 95 rejected out of 100. And then you talked about a breakthrough that came for you. But before we get to that breakthrough, because there's a number there too, I believe what I've heard from you today, Jeff Karp, you are the physical and spiritual manifestation of a life and business Rosetta Stone and Swiss Army knife. This is you. A physical and spiritual manifestation of a life and business Rosetta Stone that one uses to translate, and a Swiss Army hand knife, which one uses as a tool, which you and yourself mentioned, a Swiss Army knife. Back to numbers. How you do this, how you do these translations in life and business is you translate them and guide them through the number 7. Through the number 7. And let me read for you the meaning of the number 7. Spiritual awakening, divine perfection, mysticism and intuition, balance and harmony. This is your nature point. Transformation and sacred geometry. These are the 7 things that make up, or 6 things that make up the meaning of the number 7. Why do I say that your translation is guided by the number 7? In what grade were you when you had your breakthrough?
2nd grade.
2nd grade. I thought you said 7th. I thought you said 7th. All right.
7th grade was when, 7th grade is when I was identified, but actually in the 2nd grade, I was asked a question by a tutor that let me open up to thinking about thinking. That's
okay, got it.
Yeah.
So 7th grade was when you were identified. Yes.
Yeah. That's
huge. why I think the number 7 has something
that was
spiritual about you.
That was huge. Yeah. That's wow.
That's it, brother.
Never thought of it that way.
DC has a way of doing this, Jeff.
But guess what? When I was in the 2nd grade, I was 7 years old.
There you go. There you go.
There you go.
Whoop, there it is.
Whoop, there it is. That's what I got for you, brother.
Wow. Thank you.
Awesome.
That was beautiful. Both. Thank you. Thank you
Jeff,
so much. Yeah.
Jeff, we're about to hit the close. Is there anything that you want to share with us that you've learned from our conversation that we've had with you today that you'd like to share?
Well, I think it's really just reflection and awareness that there's so many beautiful people that are here. We're here together at the same time and place, and that we really are connected in ways that we don't always feel, that we don't always experience. And through conversation like what we've just been having, we really can, and through listening, we can not only connect, but we can deepen those connections. And I think that, to me, this podcast is real data that is really showing, we met on a plane, and for a very short, we didn't even speak for the whole part. It was only a small part of it. And I think that, to me, this conversation really, it's the data that shows it shows the evolution of a connection, right? Between 3 people here. And to me, that's just really powerful. And I think it's a huge statement of what's possible if we take the time to engage in conversation and lead with curiosity and really focus on listening, because it's clear to me that your summaries are a direct sort of impact of the listening that you have been doing, and so that also I feel it, right? And so to me, that's just really beautiful.
Brand nerds, thanks for listening to Brands, Beats, and Bytes. The executive producers are Jeff Shirley, Daryl D.C. Cobbin, Larry Taman, Haley Cobbin, Jade Tate, and Tom Dioro.
The Podfather.
That is he. And if you do like this podcast, please subscribe and share. And for those on Apple Podcasts, if you are so inclined, we love those excellent reviews. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we look forward to next time, where we will have more insightful and enlightening talk about marketing.